I say let's get started. The folks who are not joined it can join us in flight. Everyone, good afternoon. My name is Brian Borak, and I'm the CEO of RelayiQ. My co-host and main speaker for today will be Anthony Chamberas. He's the CTO and technical expert for RelayiQ. So thank you for joining us this afternoon. This will be a technical session talking about how to detect outliers in your dashboards using machine learning techniques. I think everyone's line is muted, but you can raise your hand and ask a question during our hour-long session. I'll get them and I'll either answer them myself or I'll pose them to Anthony to ask. So today we're going to cover a few quick topics. I'll go through what we've seen in the BI market today and some challenges around use cases from dashboard or visualization technologies. Go deep into machine learning and outlier detection from your data, and also give you a demo of the beta version of the RelayiQ technology that includes advanced outlier detection mechanisms. So you'll get a few use cases and examples of how to use which machine learning technique for what kind of data sources. So let's kick it off. I think we all understand the challenge today is how to act really fast with changes in your data. Those changes have to be detected quickly and accurately. And again, that'll be the focus on today's workshop. But I hope everyone agrees the world is moving faster and faster. And you got to detect these anomalies pretty quickly to stay competitive. I personally met with 400 people at the last Tableau conference in Las Vegas. And almost everyone I talked about the challenge today in the BI world is we've all built great visualizations to showcase data in Tableau and other dashboarding technologies, but the pace is so quick. How do you find that outlier to take that action? To be looking at dashboards consistently to find that yourself or to have your end users find that is very challenging. And again, that's what we want to solve today is how do you automate all of that to find those outliers quickly to your end user? And we found, and this slide makes me laugh, that what's happened to cause so many dashboards to be created in the market. Anthony, who's our CTO, says on the left-hand side of the chart, who builds great dashboards to answer real business questions. And that's me on the right side, who just wants to get actual insights, delivered to me. I don't have time to look through dashboards to find out what's happening and what to go do about it. So that conflict exists in almost every enterprise customer we work with and talk with. And the question is, how do we get better and get out of this firefighting mode? So what we have done, and we think the market's going towards, is automation. How do you automate the BI environment and really sit above the dashboard technologies to automate detection of outliers based on critical KPIs? How do you prescribe an actionable plan when that outlier is noticed? And how do you notify the right person or machine in their workflow to take that action? So we've seen these three steps are all critical. Detection of the outliers, prescriptions and notifications. Again, today we'll focus our time on the detection piece mostly, and we'll have other workshops focus more on prescribe and notify as well. So my last slide kind of pulls together our philosophy of an automation engine that's required to take the best advantage of your dashboard information. On the left-hand side, we'll go through today in depth detection mechanisms that can look at data and metrics in your dashboards using machine learning, looking for that anomaly. On the right-hand side, we'll also walk you through how to notify a person or a machine to take an action. Again, it could be a person or a machine. In the middle, we'll also show you today our policy engine that allows the analyst and the business manager to create policies so that outliers hit. What is the prescription for the end user or machine to go do? Using things like natural language and AI to drive that prescription, but always having the human-centric flavor involved in that conversation. Because today we all know the machine's not smart enough to understand the business nuance to drive always an accurate prescription. That human involvement is critical. So let me turn over to Anthony. I know we might have gotten 1 or 2 questions in, where I went pretty quick to introduce the concept, but I'll turn the slides and control over to Anthony to take over. Anthony, you want me to walk through the slides for you until we get to the demo section?
That sounds great, yes.
Perfect. So I'll let you go.
Okay, all right, thank you. So Brian, hello everyone, thanks for joining. I'm Anthony Chimbaris. I'm the CTO and co-founder of RelayiQ. As Brian indicated, we're looking at solving this problem with three main aspects. One is detection, one is prescription, and one is notification. As he indicated, I'll be talking today about detection. Our general methodology for detecting outliers is in our platform is that we model what a data point should be, and I put should in quotes there, and compare that to the actual value. So this could be a number of different ways of modeling what it should be. It could be something fixed and static, all the way up to some advanced algorithm that is trying to anticipate what a value should be. Either way, we're trying to anticipate what it should be and then compare that to an actual. And if we see a variance, that's what's triggering an outlier and a notification and so forth. So high level, that's how we're approaching this problem. And what I'll do is drill into the different approaches we use, the different techniques and algorithms and models to give you a sense of what they are and when you might want to use each one. So Brian, you can jump on to the next slide. So on the right-hand side, fairly generic dashboard with a lot of different components to it, some big numbers, some heat maps, some bar charts, trend lines, etc. What I want to do is talk about all the different models that we use on a dashboard like this for detecting outliers and when we would use each one. So we've classified our models into 2 buckets. One is rules-based. This is where somebody ahead of time is defining some level of what they expect the attribute or the metric to be. And the other is machine learning based, where we're letting the machine and statistics and math and data tell us what it thinks the result should be. Under each of these, we have 3 different model types. One is constant, one is variable, one is window functions. And then under machine learning, it's mean and standard deviation, seasonality and trend, and multivariate. So I'll go through all 6 of these in detail and show you examples on the dashboard of when we would use them and why. And then we'll jump into a demo to show how you would use our product to sit on top of a dashboard like this to leverage these kinds of algorithms. So Brian, why don't you jump on to the next slide? Okay, so the first one is constant. This is by far the simplest. This is something that Tableau, in fact, does today with their alerting capability. And this is where you might have a single number or a set of numbers that should fall around a static or unchanging target. What I mean by that is we have this single number here, the 2.297 million, and perhaps we have a target that we want to compare that against. It could be for budget or quota, but the point is it's something that is fixed and not changing, and we want to compare to it on a regular basis. And we could do this with a single value, meaning if it's above 2 million, let me know, or with a range, maybe if it's between 2 and 2.5 million, or greater than 2.5 or less than 2. So we have the ability to look at it from different perspectives like that, but the point here is that it's fixed and static and likely not changing. What that does not mean, and I'll get into this in the demo, is that it has to be the same for everyone. This could be a different number for different people, depending on different quotas, and our platform allows for that. But the point is it's either not changing or very slowly changing number, meaning it's a quota that is good for the year. So that is the first one, constant. Next one, Brian. So the next one is variable. This is a situation where you might have two measures, say in a Tableau dashboard, that you're expecting would move together, meaning they'd move in the same direction together. What I highlighted in this chart or in the dashboard is the set of bar charts in the upper left. One is representing sales and the other one is representing profit. And these are sum of sales and sum of profit for different product subcategories. What we would expect is that the higher the sales we have, the more profit we would have. That's maybe not a reasonable expectation for all businesses, but for this superstore business, we're going to make that assumption. And if you squint at the profit bar chart, you can see that it is kind of trending down along with the sales target. I'm sorry, with the sales metric. So in this particular model, what we want to do is look at sales and make sure that it is not deviating from some factor relative to profit. I'm sorry, the other way around. We want to look at profit and make sure it's not deviating off of some factor relative to sales. So that way we can look at different subcategories, for example, labels, and know if we're getting a reasonable amount of profit relative to sales, as opposed to some fixed threshold, which really wouldn't work here because, as you can see, each subcategory has a different magnitude and quantity from a sales perspective, and trying to define what profit should be based off of something that is the same for every subcategory is not reasonable. So we want something that can slide up and down depending on some other factor like sales. You could say, well, why don't we just create a ratio or some kind of difference to try to identify and maybe use the constant approach in that regard if we're going to be normalizing by something like sales. And the answer is absolutely, you can do that. But sometimes you don't want to change your dashboard. Maybe you don't want a metric in your dashboard that shows that ratio. Maybe you don't want to put it in and hide it just for the sake of notification and monitoring. So this approach allows you to do that calculation outside of the dashboard itself. All right, next Brian. So this next one and the last in the rules-based models is what we're calling window functions. This is if we want to look at consecutive changes, say in the same direction, meaning have I gone up in the last 3 periods? Maybe a percent change across periods. So if I compare today to 4 periods ago, was my percent change greater than some value? This is something that is looking across, think about your data set, looking across rows in your data set, as opposed to looking across columns and making a calculation in that way. Another way of thinking about window functions is with moving averages. So, what is the average for the last 5 periods, and is that above some threshold or not? So again, you could calculate all this stuff in your Tableau dashboard and then use the constant model that I talked about first. But again, if you don't want to change your dashboard, what we're suggesting here is that we do that kind of calculation outside with the outlier detection mechanism in our tool. And by the way, before you go on, Brian, it doesn't have to be just about change over time. It could be across dimensions as well. So maybe you want to look at relative differences, relative percentages across some categorical value, like a subcategory. Okay, next one. So the next one has to do, now we're getting into what we'll refer to broadly as machine learning techniques. The first one is fairly simplistic. It's really just looking at the mean and standard deviation of the data set. And what I've highlighted here is profit ratio across states. What we would expect with, again, with this fictitious company, with profit ratio across states, we would hope that it's static, not static, but stable, meaning it's not varying depending on state, that what we're selling into different states, if we're not giving special discounts to certain states, would be about the same. So we want to use a mechanism like mean and standard deviation to detect those states that might be outliers in this case. This is really good if you want to look across a dimension or even across time, when your base assumption is that it really should be the same in every category. Now, if that assumption isn't true, you don't want to use this technique. But if your assumption is that I expect whatever metric I'm measuring to be the same across every category or across time, then I can use a mean and standard deviation to detect my outliers in that sense. Now, there are some deeper assumptions that I won't get into too much detail here around the distribution of the data and that it's normally distributed and so forth. And then there are some approaches to satisfying those requirements if they're not met. But for now, at a high level, if you have an assumption that your metrics are not changing across category or time, or that they should not be different across categories and time, then using a mean and standard deviation is a reasonable approach. And really what you're trying to do is get a sense of the underlying variability of your data set, and try to identify those individual elements that are exceeding that expected variability. All right, Brian, next one. So the next one is counter to what I was just talking about as it relates to time series. In the previous example, I was saying the assumption is that you would expect it to be fairly stable within some variation over time, or I mentioned over some category. In this case, you expect the opposite. You expect that there's seasonality, and you expect that there's some kind of trend. Maybe it's an upward trend or a downward trend. And you want the model to identify that and correct for it and adjust for it. And so that's what seasonality and trend approach does. We use an autoregressive integrated moving average, or ARIMA, to do this. We go even further and use something called an auto ARIMA, which automatically optimizes the hyperparameters around the data set to make sure that it's fitting the best model to the data set that's presented. So generally what we do here, and I spoke to this in the methodology slide at the very top, is we will fit a model to using every data point in our data set except for the very last one. Because conceivably that's the one we're interested in monitoring, the most recent data point. Once we fit that model, what we do is we make a prediction of where do we think this very last data point should be based on the model we fit for the historical data. And we provide not only that call it prediction, I'll use air quotes there, prediction, but also a confidence range. So where should we expect that value to fall, given all the historical seasonality and trend that we've detected using our ARIMA model? We then compare our most recent data point to that prediction range. If we fall outside of the range, then it's an outlier. If it's inside the range, then it's meeting some reasonable, educated prediction of what we think that value should be based off of the historical data. This is only for time series data. This is not something you could use, say, on categorical data. The autoregressive or the ARIMA has some certain assumptions that it is working off of time series data, so it wouldn't work off of categorical data. And this is a good model to use when business cycles are known and present. So you know that you have low sales in the summer and then a peak in Q4, and that you've been showing year over year growth of 5, 10, 20%. And you want to be able to fit a model to that experience that you've had. Okay, so last one, Brian. All right, last one is multivariate. This is where you might have various business attributes that you think are correlated to some dependent business outcome. And what I mean by that, in this highlighted area of the dashboard, is showing, for example, the customer segment and in the product subcategories. Within the heat map are sales, total sales. So what we're saying here is that perhaps product subcategory and customer segment as inputs to this model are able to reasonably predict what total sales would be for, say, any given period. Again, what we're trying to do is model what a value should be and then compare to what it actually is. So with a multivariate approach, we're allowed to take various attributes that we think might have an influence. I won't say causation. We never say causation in statistics, but might be related to some outcome like sales. The other nice thing about this is you can also look at interactions across these attributes or features. So for example, maybe within the customer segment, we tend to see higher bookcase sales than in the corporate segment. So it allows for those kinds of combinations of attributes to be considered as well. These attributes can be numeric, they can be categorical, they can be time-based, or even free text. There are a lot of tools out there. I'll give a shout out to Data Robot, who does a really good job at taking free text inputs and generating what's called a bag of words to really look at words and phrases in some kind of contextual input to predict some numeric outcome. So really, you're a lot of freedom here for the attributes that might drive this metric that you're trying to monitor. Some approaches, there's the basic regression, decision trees, and neural networks. We are working on a neural network model for our tool right now. Hopefully it'll be ready within the next few weeks to be able to show to people. But the idea here again is that it's taking in several attributes to predict an outcome so that we can see if that prediction is different again from what actually happened. And this is really good when various business segments vary in behavior, meaning bookcases in the consumer segment are generally higher than what you'd see in home office. So you want to be able to take advantage of that. Okay, so that is the last model, and I think we're ready for the demo now. So Brian, if you can stop sharing, I will share my screen. Okay, so I'm going to start with this dashboard, which we were looking at. Nothing's really changed here. As I went through, there are some bar charts and heat maps and trend lines and so forth, and some numbers. And what I want to do is point RelayiQ at this dashboard so that we can begin to monitor various metrics using different detection algorithms. So in order to do that, there are two ways that we can hook into this dashboard. One is by dropping our extension. We have an extension in the Tableau Marketplace onto this dashboard. It displays itself as a button. Or if you don't want a button sitting on your dashboard, you can grab the URL for the dashboard, come over to our application and click on Create a Template. And you would just paste the URL in here, and it would launch a workflow that I'm about to get into now. So rather than starting one from scratch, I'm going to open one up that I've already built so you don't have to sit and watch me type and point and click too much. So the first thing that happens when you connect into a dashboard is it tells the user, and I'm playing the role of an analyst right now, who would be defining the model for detecting the outlier and giving the prescriptions and setting up the notifications. The first thing it does is it tells me what metrics it found in that dashboard. So it's giving me this list here to say that there's this profit ratio sheet, and on there's a profit ratio metric and sales and profit sheet with sales and the profit metric in, and so forth and so on. So what I had already set up was this template that is looking at the total sales, and that is that big number right here. So if I wanted to set up a very simple outlier detection mechanism against this, for example, I want to compare it to some constant value, I can select that as my model. If I want to drop in some kind of dimension, maybe I'll just look at the label total sales, since that number is not really sliced by anything. I can then also say, I want to know maybe when this is, say, between two numbers. So I'm going to say between I'll do 1.5 million and 1.8 million. Oops, it's 18 million. There we go. Okay, so as you can see, it drew this static band here for me between 1.5 and 1.8 million. And since my actual value, the sales of 2.29, is not within that range, it's showing up as blue. If I were to extend this to 2.8, and I'm saying I want to get notified when I'm between that range, you can see now it's turned orange, indicating that I am between this range that I've defined here. Now, this is really just a tool for the analyst to visually see what these thresholds mean and how they play out. I'll show in a moment how we can really start to customize this for individual recipients once the analyst is done creating this template. Another model that we can look at is the mean and standard deviation. So if I look at, say, profit ratio here, and I want to look at profit ratio, I'm sorry, that's not the one I wanted. No, that is it. I'm going to look at it by state. I think this is the right one. And I'm going to make this the X bar, which is the mean and standard deviation. You can see now that rather than me as the analyst telling it what my static threshold should be, looking at the data, the model has determined what those outliers are. And so in this case, I'm saying if it's between minus and positive 1.5 standard deviations around the mean, then consider it an outlier. So you can see that this little markup here is okay because it's outside that range, not between, and as well as those negative ones. Now I could flip this and say I'm more interested in when it's outside and not within, meaning that there's some numbers on the fringes and you can see the colors flipped. So a lot of flexibility of how you define your ranges. Maybe you're greater than, less than, inside, outside, etc. And then the last model that I wanted to show here was the time series. So if I look at my sales trend, and that's my metric, and then I select my order date as my dimension, and what the tool does is it detects that that is indeed a time series, and it flips the visualization over to a line chart from a bar chart. And it held on to my mean and standard deviation model here. So you can see that it's picked up with the mean and standard deviation and it's identifying those outliers nicely. But as I was saying earlier, I know that there's seasonality and trend here. So that the mean and standard deviation model is not the best. So I want to flip this over to be a time series that lets me enter in the number of periods in a season if I know them. If not, I don't need to enter them. And what's going on right now is it's doing its best to fit that data stream to an ARIMA model. Just for demonstration, it's highlighting for me these data points that fell outside of the predicted range. But in practice, when I actually am checking these values on an ongoing basis, I'm really only interested in the most recent one. In this case, my predicted value, which is the gray band, falls on either side of my actual, so I wouldn't necessarily trigger this to be an outlier. If I wanted to flip this around and say, tell me when I'm in between that prediction range, then you'll see the colors change. But the point here is that we're really only looking at the most recent data point, because that's what we're interested in. We don't want to know if something already happened. We want to know what the most recent activity is and whether it's out of norm. So those are three models I wanted to show in our tool. Now I'll just quickly kind of wrap up with the rest of the tool and in how you can take these models and start to monitor them on an ongoing basis. So if I've defined my model here, I can then go over to prescribe. And this is where I can really construct a message that would go out to non-technical users. They don't know what an ARIMA is. They don't know about outlier detection. They just want to know, as Brian said at the top of the call, when something went wrong so that they can go take an action. So what we provide here is this rich text editor that allows for different types of formatting. We can drop in different message variables that personalize the notification to the person receiving it. For example, their name, maybe putting in the value of a filter that's specific to them, that is selected for them. We can put in links to other applications, maybe a link to a calendar, a request to go review a dashboard. The point is here, these are prescriptions or actions that we're recommending to this recipient. Again, as the analyst, I would try to define these in a way that is really going to drive action and business impact. I might want to work with a business manager to understand what the relevant actions are when certain situations occur in the dashboard that I'm monitoring, so that I can prescribe these things in an appropriate way to these end users and end recipients. You can also drop in things like dashboard images, and we also have things like dashboard recommendations. So if there are other dashboards within the Tableau server environment that are similar to the one we're monitoring, we can even recommend those to the end users as well. The next step is where we select who should be receiving this notification based off of the model and the criteria we've defined. So what we have here is the ability to select the recipients. What's showing here is a list of users in this system, and I have the ability to go pick the ones that I want to send this to, along with the channels that I'd like them to receive it in. We have three default channels, and I'll talk about one additional one that we're building out now. It's email, text, and Slack. So I can pick amongst those. And as you can see, when I select them, it's adding the recipients to this list. I can take away recipients if I wish. And then this is where the real fun comes. I can really start to customize the criteria around what each of these recipients will get and what will trigger their notifications. Now, in this case, I'm using that ARIMA model with a 95% prediction confidence range. Perhaps somebody wanted to shrink that range a little and be a little more sensitive to variations in the data. Maybe Jason's that way, but Brian's the opposite. He doesn't want to hear about it so much, only if there's a really extreme case. So that is one mechanism. If you think back to the approach where we might be using the constant model from the rules-based approaches, maybe each one of these people has a different quota, and we want to key in the different quotas for each person so that the notification's only triggering when their specific quota is exceeded versus some generic quota across everyone. Likewise, we have the ability here to add in filters. So for example, if there's a particular field, perhaps it's a region, and I want to put in a default value of West here, I can put that, but then really start to customize for each person so that they get the filters applied to the dashboard that are relevant to them. Very easy to do. No need for custom views for every single person. We take care of all that on our end, and if we wanted to do East and West here, we can do that as well. So that's about it in terms of setting up the notification template. I can just click Save here. I can also give it a title and a description. So I might say this is a notification for when seasonal trends for sales are not realized. Hit save. And what this now does is it not only subscribes all of these recipients to this notification template, but it also creates this card on the subscriptions page that allows end users to come into our platform and subscribe to it on their own. So you can see that I just created this app here that is around a sales alert, and I had the misspelling here, but that's okay, to look at when it's not realized. if I were to click on this now as an end user, I can subscribe myself to this. I can add and remove channels. I can change filters and so forth. So I'm customizing it for myself as opposed to just relying on the analyst to do that for me. So that is kind of a quick beginning to end. Brian, I'm sure I forgot some things. So do you have other things you wanted me to point to?
Sure.
Oh,
I would I just go to the end user view and walk through some notification examples.
yep.
And also I think the action board piece might be also interesting for our participants.
Okay. All right. Very good point. Thank you. Probably the most important thing. So, so if we think about the end user perspective, what are they seeing? What are they receiving besides the screen I was just on? This is an example of an alert or a notification that was sent out to an end user based off of the template that I just built. So you can see it added in this rich text formatting with the colors and the emojis and put my name in. It knew that I was interested in the West region, so it placed that value in there. One thing I didn't touch on is you can also pull values from the dashboard itself and display them in line in the message text as opposed to kind of being locked up in the dashboard. We can also list in the body of the email or message what the outliers are. So for example, if I was monitoring, say this bar chart here, and I wanted to know which states were outliers, we can embed that into the message as well. So in this case, conceivably, it might say Montana is an outlier, or Montana and Washington. You can see that these, it held on to the rich text formatting with the bulleted items. It provided this link here to Salesforce, and as well as to maybe my manager's calendar if I wanted to make an appointment. So really the sky's the limit here in terms of how you want to drive action and where you want to take people once they receive this notification. And of course, we can't forget about Tableau and the fact that these recipients might want to go back into Tableau and take a deeper look. So when they click on this image here, we'll take them back into Tableau. It opens up that dashboard. And in fact, it will pre-filter it for them based off of the filter that's been applied for their subscription, whether they've selected it or it's been selected on their behalf. And so that is what a typical email notification looks like. I'll flip over to Slack here, and let me see if I can find a good one. Sorry.
So the good news is we use this product ourselves.
Yes.
So it's actually showing we get ourselves notified when a new user gets a new account or things are happening in our business. So that's a real life use of our software that he's kind of walking you through. So
yeah,
Slack is similar to email, a little less formatting because Slack has limitations, but similar concept.
So as you can see, the messages come across, and there's a picture of the, I'm not going to click on that one, but a picture of the dashboard here that can be expanded if necessary. And then the last one I'll show is something new we're working on, which is writing into Trello. So if you use Trello for managing your tasks or the actions that you need to take, and maybe you have a board for that, and you have all these lists where there are particular items or to-dos under each list. What we can do is send the notification right into your to-do list. So here's an example of how the alert got triggered, and it sent this notification into this Trello card with the same message that we were looking at earlier. Emojis came over, thankfully. There's a picture of the dashboard if you want it here. And again, the links out to these third-party applications. But the really neat thing here now with Trello is I can say, if there's some action that I need to take that's kind of embedded into this message, I can now move it through my process of getting my work done. So if this is now in progress, I can drag this whole card over to in progress, and then maybe awaiting reply and so forth and so on. So I can kind of check those boxes and feel satisfied that I'm moving these things along. One last piece, just wanted to show you to kind of close the loop. If I am receiving this notification and I do maybe want to change something about my subscription, I can click on this manage link here. It will take me back into the application, this similar screen that we were looking at earlier, where I can, again, add and remove channels, change filters, thresholds, frequencies, etc. So I can perform some self-service on my own, but in a very, very simple and limited way.
And Anthony, there was a question about this topic, and I'll tell my personal story. Again, we use our product ourselves to manage our day-to-day activities. And the first day Anthony set up a notification around new users, he set up for me to get it in email every hour, and I wanted it in Slack every day. So I called Anthony and said, please change my channel frequency. He said, no, go do it yourself. So we enable this really simple self-service on users to take some control and not bother the analyst with easy questions. And it's pretty effective. Anthony, anything else you wanted to highlight in your section?
No, that is it. So let me stop sharing, if that's okay.
Sure.
Maybe we can finish up the presentation.
Yep, let me share my for time, and then we'll just bring it to a close. So one thing Anthony did not mention is to get information out of a Tableau dashboard through our notification engine. That recipient does not have to be a Tableau licensed user. They only have to be if they want to take advantage and go back into Tableau to go deeper. The other thing we could not show you in a demo is third-party machine-to-machine integration, things like Calibra or Freshdesk, that you could launch an automatic notification through an API to a machine for an automated action. We only showed you actions to a person in Slack, email, Trello, or text. We also, again, can do machine-to-machine integration as well through custom APIs.
And so on the flip side of that, Brian, sorry to interrupt, is what we showed is that the trigger point coming from, or the trigger mechanism, not only coming from the outlier detection model that's selected, but also based off of our scheduler. So I think you may have seen that I could schedule to check the metric on a weekly or daily or hourly basis. We also have the ability to have that trigger come from outside, meaning if you have a workflow that runs every Sunday, but it might end at different times, you don't want to tie yourself to our schedule, because what if that workflow goes long and it misses the schedule that's been put on our end? So there is this ability to call out to our API to initiate the workflow on our end, rather than making it based off of our own scheduler.
So what Anthony described, I'll get to questions in a second, is really our automation platform. Again, we can detect automatically outliers, again, through an API call to launch detection or through a scheduler, add a prescription in the message body, and then notify any person or machine of customized actions. So with that, let me open up the session to questions. There should be ability to answer questions now, or you can do your chat window to chat to ask questions. So any questions or feedback? So I've got one new question that came in. So the question is RelayiQ aware when Tableau dashboard is refreshed, or wait till Tableau is yet to refresh reload?
So I can answer that one, Brian.
Great.
So there are two approaches to this. One is kind of back to what I was just saying. You could set up our scheduler to check that as often as you see fit. You maybe want to check it once an hour or once a day. And we will, obviously detect when it's done once that schedule gets kicked off. The other approach is to tell us when it's done, and that can be done through some other mechanism. If you're using an ETL tool, for example, to build an extract or load a database table. And when that process is done, let us know. And then we can send the notifications out to people to say, hey, the dashboard's been refreshed, or it's been refreshed and I found these outliers. Tableau is coming out with some webhooks that will give the ability to call out to third-party platforms like ours when something like an extract is done. They don't have that in place now. So unless you're using some tool like ETL type tool to build your extract or load your data, which at the end is calling us, or just setting a schedule for us to go look once an hour, there's no other way for Tableau to tell us that something is done.
Anthony, another question came in. We showed the configure subscription screen. Does it have a cancel button? Which I assume might, so why don't you answer that question, but also maybe touch on muting, which might be part of that question.
Okay, so yes, there are a few different things there. One is you can completely delete the template altogether, which is kind of a wholesale deletion of the template and all the subscriptions, and the analyst or administrator would have the permissions to do that, but nobody else. And then the individual subscribers can cancel their own or unsubscribe to their own subscriptions, but that doesn't impact anybody else or the template. And then what Brian was referencing is this notion of muting, which is if I'm monitoring a metric and it goes out of control, I don't want to hear about it every hour if that's how the schedule has been set up. Just tell me once, and then and don't tell me again until maybe it comes back in control and then goes back out of control again. So that's a feature we refer to as muting, which is available.
So Anthony, two more questions came in. I can answer the first one.
Okay.
Does your product work with Tableau only? And the answer is today our first GA connector is with Tableau through the Tableau extension or the URL copy paste. We are adding more dashboards in the next few months. Power BI and a few others are on our short list. We're also looking into direct from databases, things like Snowflake and Vertica, even other apps like Anaplan. So you'll see us with a roadmap for 2020, start adding those kinds of applications into our solution. So you can imagine our templates that they created are each based on a different application that's consolidated in that KPI view for the end user. So it abstracts away the third-party apps into one place to go subscribe to KPIs you care about, driven from all of those enterprise technologies. So that's coming soon. I'd love to hear your feedback after the call on what your priority might be. We've heard a lot for Power BI, Salesforce, and a few others. Next question I can also answer, I think we might jump in, is can we add an email distribution list rather than individual email addresses to add users? So I think, do you want to touch on how to bulk add and change users and the kinds of emails we can send to?
Yes, yeah. So I didn't show it in the demo, but we have the ability to integrate into a remote list that would contain the users and their contact information like email and mobile number if they're wanting to get SMS, and Slack ID and so forth. And then also a list that would define what the selections are for each one of their subscriptions. So by no means we would expect the analyst to go through all the busy work of pointing and clicking and typing and entering all of the users and the subscriptions and so forth. We do offer the ability to integrate into these remote lists to handle that, and also to stay in sync. So we would basically go ping that list on some predefined frequency to make sure it's kept up to date on our end. The other side of this question is, what if I want to use a group email as opposed to setting up individual emails and users in RelayiQ? That is fine. We can do that, but we strongly feel that's diminishing the value of what we do, which is this whole notion of customization and personalization so that everyone is getting something specific to them. as opposed to something that's specific to the group. Now, sometimes that's fine. Maybe you want to blast out to the company that there's certain sales goals been hit, and that needs to be the same for everyone. And you want to just handle that with one distribution list. That's fine. But when you talk about more operational monitoring, getting personalized is obviously much more effective and impactful.
And the same thing for Slack channels. All that is possible with our platform. I think that was the last question I've seen come in. Any other questions before we wrap it up? Oh, a few more questions came in. One more. It's if I want to filter data from work days only, can I do that in RelayiQ, or do I have to set a filter in Tableau in advance?
Yes, good question, and thank you for asking it. That is in our backlog, and the fact that you just asked it is going to bump it up in priority. So yes, the workaround now is that it needs to be filtered in Tableau in that way, and then that would obviously come over. We want to create a mechanism when that scheduling step is selected to be able to say, run it every day at this time except for Saturday and Sunday.
Great. Any last questions before we wrap it up? If there are questions after the fact, I think everyone has my email. It's bborack@relayiq.com. Everyone, again, thank you for your time. We do offer for our customers, we could do a personalized demo for you or your team. Also, we do trials. If you want to try our software in your environment, please reach out or ask any questions you have. We love to hear from the market on their desires. And I see one more question come in at the last minute, which we'll answer. Can personalization filter be picked up from the database instead of typing it in? So Anthony, I think you know that answer. I do too, but I'll let you answer it.
Yes, so I don't know if this person was at Tableau conference and saw dynamic parameters. So it feels a lot like dynamic parameters. But yes, the answer is yes. So I talked earlier about connecting into a remote list. That remote list could contain all the personalized filters for each recipient, and we would just pick it up and ingest it. So you wouldn't need to type that information in.
Yeah, we don't expect for an enterprise deployment, you have thousands of users to type in every person, their filters, their channels, their frequency. We'll sync with you a list on your side. That manual configuration is more for a limited team or for a trial. But again, in production, I think more of that list syncing is more practical. Mm-hmm. Okay, everyone. Well, we thank you for your time. We're here to help. We're RelayiQ. And we're here to unlock your Tableau superpowers with automation. Everyone have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.